Good morning. We are in the book of Jonah, so I hope you'll turn there, whether you have a physical Bible or a digital Bible. We'll start out in and around chapter 3. The Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn tells of the Soviet prison system. It's based on his own experience with it as well as research about it. And one of the more famous quotes from this work goes like this: "If only it were so simple. If only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. And who is willing to destroy a piece of his own heart?" In this quote, Alexander Solzhenitsyn points to two of the primary desires that many of us have when it comes to evil and evil people in the world. Number one, we want to be separate from them. They are evil. We are not. We want to separate them from us. And number two, we want them to be destroyed. They should pay for what they've done. They should get what they deserve. Separation and destruction. We see these two themes over and over again in movies that take up the topic of evil in the world, in novels that explore evil people in the world, on social media, and in news cycles. And yet fulfilling this twofold desire is extremely complicated. Because, as he points out, they are just like us. And this evil we see in them is also seen in us. And so it really raises this difficult question of what do we do with evil in the world? And what does God do with evil in the world? Which brings us to the book of Jonah. In one way, we could think about Jonah's story as an extended conversation about what or who is evil and what can be or should be done about evil. There are three people or groups in the story of Jonah that are called evil. The first is not a surprise. The second is a bit of a surprise. And the third is a real shocker. And so let's just look at each of these three as they occur throughout the book of Jonah. The first person or group in the story of Jonah called evil is the people of Nineveh. And Jonah feels toward them the way that we often feel toward those who are evil in our world. He wants to be separate from them. He wants to be as far away from them as he can get. And even more so, he wants them destroyed by God. So Jonah chapter 1, verse 1, "Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, for their evil has come up before me." But Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. The people of Nineveh are evil. Nineveh was filled with evil. Nineveh is a chief city for the nation of Assyria, and Jewish people like Jonah would have considered this city to be idolatrous, unclean, pagan, and evil. Not too long after this, the king of this city, Sennacherib, in 701 BCE, will lay siege to Jerusalem, increasing the Jewish disdain of the city of Nineveh. The biblical book Nahum is written to mock the city of Nineveh, having been destroyed by the Babylonians, Nahum calls Nineveh a city of bloodshed. Nineveh was known in the ancient world as a great lawless city. There are reliefs from the palace in Nineveh showing some of the gruesome military tactics of the Assyrian armies. Writers like Aristotle and Herodotus describe the depravity of the city of Nineveh. Nineveh is evil. This is not some straw man that Jonah has propped up. Nineveh is evil. There is evil in the world. And none of it escapes God's notice. It rises up before God. If there is some evil in the world that frightens you, stresses you, causes you anxiety, God is aware of it. It rises up before God. Even if other people try to hide it, even if others minimize it, God does not. God sees this evil. And so he sends Jonah to preach the word of the Lord to the people of Nineveh, to call out against the evil in the city. And this sounds like something that Jonah would want to do. We see this happening all the time in the news cycle and on social media, people calling out against whatever evil they see in the world. But Jonah does not want to do this. He so not wants to do this that he flees to Tarshish as far away as he can get from the city of Nineveh. Why? Jonah reveals why. Chapter 4, verse 2. And he prayed to the Lord and said, "O Lord, is this not what I said when I was yet in my country? That is why I made haste to flee to Tarshish, for I knew that you are a gracious God and a merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love, and relenting from disaster. Therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live." And the Lord said, "You do well to be angry." This word disaster in verse 2 is the same word translated evil throughout the book. And what frustrates Jonah is that he cannot trust that God will respond to the evil of the Ninevites with evil of his own. He is afraid that God will respond to the evil of the Ninevites with grace and mercy and slowness of anger and abundance of steadfast love, which is, in fact, exactly what God does in the text that we read earlier in chapter 3. Then the word of the Lord came to Jonah the second time, saying, "Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it the message that I tell you." So Jonah arose and went to Nineveh according to the word of the Lord. Now Nineveh was an exceedingly great city, 3 days' journey in breadth. Jonah began to go into the city, going a day's journey, and he called out, "Yet 40 days, and Nineveh shall be overthrown." And the people of Nineveh believed God. They called for a fast and put on sackcloth from the greatest of them to the least of them. The word reached the king of Nineveh, and he arose from his throne, removed his robe, covered himself with sackcloth, sat in ashes, and issued a proclamation and published throughout Nineveh by the decree of the king and his nobles. "Let neither man nor beast, herd nor flock taste anything. Let them not feed or drink water, but let man and beast be covered with sackcloth, and let them call out mightily to God. Let everyone turn from his evil way and from the violence that is in his hands. Who knows? God may turn and relent and turn from his fierce anger so that we may not perish." When God saw what they did, how they turned from their evil way, God relented of the disaster that he had said he would do to them, and he did not do it. The word disaster there in verse 10 is the same word translated evil. What Jonah wants more than anything is for his God to respond to their evil with divine evil. And what he cannot stand is that God does not do that. Instead, God meets the evil of the Ninevites with grace and mercy and slowness of anger and abundance of steadfast love. And the rest of the book then continues to turn on its head our own ideas of evil. It does this in a couple more ways. First, it reveals that Jonah, who believes that he is not evil, is indeed evil. And second, it reveals that God, who is not evil, seems to be evil. Let's look first at Jonah. Notice the evil that blows into this story because of Jonah. Chapter 1, verse 4, "But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship threatened to break up. Then the mariners were afraid, and each cried out to his God, and they said to one another, 'Come, let us cast lots, that we may know on whose account this evil has come upon us.' So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. Then they said to him, 'Tell us on whose account this evil has come upon us.' He said to them, 'Pick me up and hurl me into the sea. Then the sea will quiet down for you, for I know it is because of me that this great tempest has come upon you.'" Here, the great tempest is called evil. And this great tempest threatens the lives of the sailors on this boat. All of these sailors on this boat are about to lose their lives unjustly, unfairly, undeservedly. Why? Because of Jonah. It's because of Jonah that this great evil has blown into this story. The same word applied to the Ninevites is now applied to Jonah. And so the second person in the story of Jonah called evil is Jonah. And this is surprising because in Scripture, the prophets are the good guys. They're the ones who sweep in and save the day. They stand for justice. They stand for righteousness. They stand in the gap. And Jonah is evil. And so the book of Jonah then begins to persuade us to stop looking out there at them and to start looking in here at us. The book of Jonah challenges us that one of our first steps in dealing with evil in the world is not to separate ourselves from them, not to destroy them, but to mitigate the darkness in our own hearts. And maybe this part of the book of Jonah can produce a little bit of empathy within us when it comes to evil. Because so many times when we see evil in other people, or even when we see evil in us, we dehumanize them, or we dehumanize ourselves. We see evil in other people and we make them out to be monsters. We see evil in ourselves and we make ourselves out to be monsters. But Jonah is evil. And he is a real person with a real name for whom God cares deeply. Nineveh is evil. And they are real people with real names for whom God cares deeply. And so perhaps this part of the story of Jonah could elicit a little bit of compassion, a little bit of sympathy and empathy within ourselves as we encounter evil in the world. And then there's one more figure called evil in the story of Jonah. It happens near the end. Chapter 4, verse 1. But it displeased Jonah exceedingly, and he was angry. Jonah has just witnessed God respond to the evil of the Ninevites, not with evil, but with mercy and graciousness and an abundance of steadfast love and a slowness of anger. And so we're told it displeased Jonah exceedingly. The word translated displeased is the same word translated evil elsewhere in the book. Essentially, the verse says, but Jonah saw this response from God as exceedingly evil. And so the third person in the book of Jonah who is called evil is God. God responds to the evil of the Ninevites in a way that is so absurd, so unreasonable, so unsatisfactory, so nonsensical, that Jonah views it as evil. Now, Jonah did not mind this response when it came to his own evil. And for the most part, I suspect neither do we. When you find yourself in the belly of a fish at the bottom of the ocean, you want that response from God. You want an absurd amount of compassion and graciousness and mercy and steadfast love shown to you. But the last thing that Jonah wants is often the last thing that we want. That same absurd, unreasonable, unfair, unjust grace and mercy and compassion shown to them because they don't deserve it. And here is where the story of Jonah begins to seep into the story of Jesus. Because rightly understood, what happened at the cross of Christ is something that Jonah would call evil. It was unfair. It was unreasonable. It was unjust. It was undeserved. And it was love. And rightly understood, the teachings of Jesus call us to this same evil love. When Jesus teaches us to love our enemies, he's calling for this same type of nonsensical, irrational, unreasonable kind of love to be shown to them. We are called to respond to the evil within us and the evil without us with this evil of love. In 1957, Martin Luther King Jr. preached at the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. And that Sunday morning, he preached on Jesus' call to love our enemies. And King shared a little story about how he and his brother were driving from Chattanooga, Tennessee to Atlanta, Georgia. The journey took place at night. King's brother was driving the car, and for some reason, most of the cars that were coming their way that night on the road in the dark had their bright lights on. And it was so difficult for King's brother to stay on the road to keep that car safe with these bright headlights, just one after another. And finally, King's brother was just upset and frustrated, and he said, the next car that comes our way with its brights on, I'm going to turn my brights on. But King managed to talk him down by telling him that he would only be assuring their mutual destruction because they wouldn't be able to see and we won't be able to see, and our two cars might crash together. And then King went on to use that image to talk about the way that we often respond to evil in the world. He said, hate for hate, only intensifies the existence of hate and evil in the universe. If I hit you and you hit me and I hit you back and you hit me back and go on, you see that goes on ad infinitum. It just never ends. Somewhere, somebody must have a little sense, and that's the strong person. The strong person is the person who can cut off the chain of hate, the chain of evil. Somebody must have religion enough and morality enough to cut it off and inject within the very structure of the universe that strong and powerful element of love. Somewhere, somebody must have some sense. Men must see that force begets force, hate begets hate, toughness begets toughness, and it is all a descending spiral, ultimately ending in destruction for all and everybody. Somebody must have sense enough and morality enough to cut off the chain of hate and the chain of evil in the universe. And you do that by love. And that's the call of the book of Jonah. It's a book calling us to be the strong person. It's a book calling us to have so much sense in our response to evil that it seems nonsensical. To be so reasonable in the way we approach evil in the world that it seems unreasonable. Just how gracious and loving and forgiving should we imagine God to be? If we can't imagine those qualities existing in such quantities that they seem unfair, unreasonable, unjust, then Jonah calls us to keep imagining. And just how loving and forgiving and merciful and compassionate are we called to be? If we can't imagine those qualities existing in such quantities in this church, in our hearts, that people around us begin to complain, then we need to keep imagining. We're the ones called to cut that chain of hate and to love as we've been loved, to love in such a way that someone just might call it evil. Let's take just a few seconds right now and let's just meditate quietly on this question. After a few seconds, we'll close together our service. But right now, just sit with this question. In what way is God inviting me to respond to evil with love? In what way is God inviting me to respond to evil with love?